Hello and welcome back. Once again, my name is Trevor Johnson, and this will be another critical review of some professional social work literature. Once again, the purpose of these reviews is to try to take some of the intimidation out of academic writing or professional literature and make it a little bit more accessible to people who are interested in coming into the field or are maybe like freshman or sophomore level students. For myself, I am a first year master's student. I'm currently a graduate research assistant, so I've spent some time working on getting papers published. I spent a lot of time synthesizing and summarizing articles, and this is my attempt to make what I have read just that much more accessible to the general public who are interested in this field. Last time we reviewed a paper that was published in a scholarly journal. This time I'm going to be reviewing a paper titled Helping Children Navigate Their Teen Years. Now the difference in this paper is that it is more of a professional publication. It's like a guide to practitioners in the field. So it's intended to be written or to be read by psychologists, licensed clinical social workers, practicing professional counselors, those types of individuals. Once again, the target population that we'll be discussing is adolescents. This article starts off discussing the developmental stage according to Erik Erikson that he came up with in 1968. So it breaks down Erikson and his theory of stages of development, and according to Erik Erikson, adolescence is between the ages of like 14 and 21, and during that stage the main goal of an adolescent is to develop their identity as opposed to being confused. And if I were to look back at my own experience as an adolescent, that rings very true. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who I was and what I was doing, and there was a lot of confusion in there before I developed my identity. And I just like to break things down like that simply because I don't think it needs to be more complicated than that in our own minds. When we're talking with other professionals or when we're writing for the field, obviously we want to use more appropriate language, but when I'm just thinking about it for myself, when I was a teenager, I was confused a lot of the time and I had trouble just figuring out my identity. And that's what Erikson describes that stage as. Another thing to note is, so Erikson has the ages between 14 and 21. Currently, adolescents, depending on what you're reading or who you're just talking to, it can go all the way up to 24. With the advances in neurobiology, we understand that the brain's not developed completely until the ages of perhaps even 26. So this adolescence thing is kind of growing. It's larger than it used to be, and that's something else to consider as a professional working in the field. So the article itself, it breaks down the adolescent identity search into two specific things. It says the goal of the identity of the adolescent is to first identify themselves, so self-identification. And this is like the individual's beliefs, attitudes, and values about themselves. So does the individual think that they're intelligent? Do they think that they're a good athlete? Do they think they're a good sibling, a role model to their younger siblings? How do they feel about themselves specifically? That's the self-identity development. And then the second main thing that an adolescent is trying to do in this time period, according to this paper, is the development of their self-esteem. So the self-esteem in this article describes it as their beliefs about their own self. So in myself, I believe that I'm intelligent, but I don't get good grades. I have been declined from a couple colleges that I've interviewed for. Then there's a gap between my beliefs and my actual self-esteem, and that could lead to some trouble for me, and that might be why I might find myself in a professional's office. So self-esteem is described in this article as the evaluations of one's own self-concept. Another example could be, I think that I'm a great athlete, but I don't make the varsity team. I can't compete with my friends in the sports that I used to be able to. So my belief about myself and the inputs that I'm getting from others aren't quite the same thing, and that might lower my self-esteem, or that might increase this gap. And then it also can work in the opposite. Like someone with high self-esteem, if I think I'm intelligent and I'm getting really good grades and I have scholarships to attend the universities that I choose, then that gap's going to shrink because my beliefs and my values are right on par. So that's what this article starts off describing as what an adolescent is doing. That's what they're developing at this stage of their life. It goes on to break self-esteem down further into the global self-esteem. So the adolescent and everything around them. How do they see themselves as they interact with their parents? How do they see themselves as they interact with their peer groups? How do they see themselves as their school, their community, everything outside themselves? And then it goes also to break it down like specifically into the adolescent themselves. Like, how do they view themselves internally? Do they find themselves with self-worth? Do they think that there's somebody that is contributing to society or worthy of attention or affection or these things? And this is something the professional wants to be aware of when working with this population. One thing that the article mentions, but it doesn't go into a lot of detail about, where I think it could have done a better job, is this is also a time period where moral development really, really comes ahead, and that identity of morals and perhaps ascribing to a certain religion or custom or belief system that can be defined in adolescence, and oftentimes is, and that's not discussed in this paper. As a professional working with clients of this age, it's important to not only be aware that might be what the client's going through, but it's also important to be aware that the parents of your client may have really specific ideas related to those topics. And if your client's under 18, you could still be mandated to report to the parent exactly what does and doesn't happen with the child in session. And the parent could also tell you specifically, like, I don't want you to discuss religion. I don't want you to discuss intercourse. These are things that my child's not prepared for. So as a professional, you need to not only be aware of those topics, but you need to be aware that you may have to include the family in the discussions and in the decisions. And it's something that is easier to be done ahead of time than to do after the fact. Because once that bridge is crossed, you can't go backwards, and that's a genie that does not get put back in the bottle. So professionals need to be aware of that in advance of the sessions, and this article doesn't really mention that at all, and that's my first critique of the article. It goes on further, and it mentions a lot of the physical changes that are happening in an adolescent's life and the impact that can have on their identity. It mentions how sensitive they are to comments of others. Their peer groups play a huge role on individuals in this stage of life, and the professional working with them wants to be cognizant of these facts. A second thing is that I found really interesting is the article mentions that these are topics that adolescents are really eager to talk about. Like, they understand these changes that are happening with them. They see things differently than they used to, and they want to talk about it with a trusted adult. But there is a dearth of adults that they feel like they can talk to about it. So more kids want to talk than adults that are willing to talk with them. And that's something that could be addressed, not necessarily like on a one-on-one view, but more of like a macro practice, coming up with like some policies or some interventions that could help kids and teenagers navigate this difficult time period of their life. Now, this article is not intended for that population. This isn't a critique on that, but it is another suggestion that I have for people that may be watching this video, is to consider a way that like you could mentor or discuss these sensitive topics with teenagers of this population going through these things in their life. Now, the article explains this gap between self-esteem and self-identity and the issues that it could cause in a young person's life, and it offers 4 specific tools to condense that gap and to bring the things closer. The first thing it mentions is label feelings accurately. This makes me think of Robin Williams in the Dead Poets Society. He talks about very being the worst word in the English language. He says, no one is very sad, they're morose. Like, that's what this article is suggesting here. Like, come up with an extended vocabulary for adolescents to describe what they're feeling. The second suggestion sounds very much the same thing, but it is giving the adolescents tools to recognize their emotions. So not only an ability to describe what they're feeling, but an awareness of what they're feeling and how it's impacting them. The third thing is it recommends teaching adolescents tools for conflict. This is a time period that's rife with conflict, with arguments with parents, with people that are happy to challenge authority. So giving an adolescent tools to combat these things or to do these things in a more helpful and healthful manner is something a professional can do and add value to their client's life. Finally, it mentions the importance, especially in modern times, of teaching the adolescent how to work in a team, and that the importance of cohesion and team building and what can be done when people are working together for a similar objective, and how that can help with that self-esteem. If an adolescents find themselves in a specific role towards something greater, it can shrink in that gap. So my biggest critique of this article is I think it does a really poor job of mentioning cultural competence or describing the differences of ethnic diversity, sexual orientation diversity, even biological diversity between boys and girls. Like, it quickly mentions that girls may have lower self-esteem than boys at this time period, but it doesn't really like go into detail about that. And it really misses the mark on describing the different identities an adolescent might be struggling with, as far as coming out as someone who is homosexual or a lesbian, or identifying as transsexual or misgendered. Especially in current times, these are things that people of this age range are dealing with all the time, and the article has like 2 paragraphs on it, and I think it could explore that much more thoroughly. And then also it just completely misses working with minorities and the importance of, asking somebody different from you what you need to know about them, and not trying to fix them from your perspective, but asking them how you can help, what you need to know so that you can be more helpful for them. I think that approaching somebody on that level as learning as well as being able to relay experiences is going to be much more beneficial than just like, here's what you need to do. I understand what you're going through. Here's the tools. Like, I personally don't understand what someone is going through if they're like a young African American woman growing up in the inner city. I am a middle-aged white man who grew up in a small town. So if she's not able to describe her life to me, I will have trouble relating to her. And this article just doesn't mention that at all. I think it could do a better job there. I do think the article is helpful. I think that there's lots to be gleaned from it, and I enjoyed reading it. I hope you enjoyed my review, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.